friends, Cherie Larkin here, blessing you today, seeing your life filled with goodness. And for the times when it's not, I have a great lesson series for you today with a formula that will help you power through any barriers. So let me ask you, have you ever reached the end of your rope? Have you bumped up against an impossible situation with no seeming way out? I feel we've all reached that edge in our hearts, in our minds, and our capabilities, and even in our consciousness, where we feel that we cannot compromise anymore, we cannot try any harder, we can't grow anymore. Raise your hand if in the school of life you are sometimes ready to just go out to recess and stay out on the playground. Certainly, we see this in the movement of our nation right now. Most of us who have been on the spiritual path for any length of time know the conditions driving us forward are there to release the larger reality of truth in human consciousness, which may never happen without the chaos of transformation that we're currently experiencing. And sometimes problems can seem bigger when they're played out on the national level. But we need to remind ourselves that a principle is a principle, meaning just like the principle of mathematics does not change whether we're working with big numbers or little numbers, a principle is a principle. And there is a spiritual principle of saving grace. And it provides that out of the darkness, there will always come a solution to any problem that will evolve us to a higher level of living and being, if we cooperate with it. Sometimes it'll do it just to do it, but it will happen a lot faster and advance your consciousness if you cooperate with it. Out of the darkness, there will always come a solution to any problem that will evolve us to a higher level of living and being. And in this series, I'm going to show you how you can cooperate with it, with that spiritual principle, how you can cooperate with it to advance your life. It's imperative that we appreciate this principle and begin to believe it and begin to live it. Out of the darkness, there will always come a solution to any problem that will evolve us to a higher level of living and being if we allow it. Now, in God mind, divine mind, in the universal Christ consciousness, there is no awareness of impossible situations. Spiritual law has been put in place, and it always works to bring forth solutions, healings, answers, whatever is needed. And we can trust this now for our nation and do our part by seeing and claiming firmly in our minds and our hearts that we claim divine truth for our nation. It's so interesting that there's all this truth and lies and alternative facts and alternative reality, but we can claim divine truth for our nation and affirm our nation, the United States of America, is under the guidance of the Christ Spirit. And that'll be a powerful affirmation to help effect this change and make this transition smooth and one that leads to positive and beautiful and divine outcomes. In the same way, if we find ourselves standing on the edge of an impossible situation, standing on the edge of chaos where things are changing faster than we can keep up, we can trust that that experience is there to drive us forward, to an expanded consciousness. We are not at the point of devastation or failure or loss or rejection, not at the point of breakdown, but standing at an amazing point of breakthrough to greater truth. So today we're looking at the story of Moses when he's standing at the Red Sea, a seemingly dead end. And we're going to discover a process for evolving our consciousness beyond any seeming barrier that we find ourselves facing. Now let me give you a brief summation of the story of Moses, this part of Moses. Moses' story is found in Exodus chapters 3 through 14, but this is the part where Moses asks Pharaoh to let my people go, let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh says no. And the Lord, which represents spiritual law, in spiritual interpretation, anytime you hear the word Lord, you're really hearing spiritual law. And so spiritual law responds to Pharaoh's ruling, negative, punishing state of consciousness by sending a series of plagues. First, it's frogs, then flies, then diseased cattle, then boils, locusts, and the 10th and final plague, last plague, was death of the firstborn child. And it brought such distress to Egypt that Pharaoh was forced to let the Israelites go. And so they left happily at first. And when they got out in the desert and things got tough, they started whining and complaining, well, maybe we should have left things the way they were. And when they reached the Red Sea and discovered that Pharaoh's armies were charging after them, they felt doomed. And they accused Moses of leading them out into the desert to die. Now Moses, spiritually, was following the intuitive insight he received to move out of Egypt. Egypt represents lower consciousness. You may remember that Moses was drawn out of water. He was raised in Pharaoh's court. In the early years, his name means drawing out. In the later years, he evolves to a consciousness of lawgiver, which is where we see him in this story. So overall, Moses represents the development in our own consciousness that hears and receives spiritual law from the burning bush, the 10 Commandments, and then acts on it. Well, actually, he didn't hear the 10 Commandments then, but he hears and receives spiritual law, and then he acts on it to draw us forward to a greater expression of life. He gave the Israelites a powerful formula for overcoming any adversity when he stretched out his staff over the Red Sea and declared those famous words, "Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of Jehovah, which he will work for you this day. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. Spiritual law will work for you, and you shall hold your peace." Beautiful, beautiful formula that we're going to look at in depth in this series of lessons. Well, Moses spoke those words, the waters divided. You know, the Israelites went through on dry land, and when the Egyptians followed through, the waters washed over them and they perished. Now, Elizabeth Sand Turner, in her book, Let There Be Light, says, there comes a time when you make your escape from living in lower consciousness. Haven't we all been there? I can't live this way anymore. I can't stay in this abuse anymore. I can't stay in this addiction anymore. I can't stay in this negative critical nature anymore. I can't stay in this fear and worry and doubt anymore. She says, there comes a time when you make your escape from living in lower consciousness. You desire to be born into the spirit, but you cannot rise out of the flesh. Something binds you down. And she says, like a hot air balloon, you're tugging at the guy wires that hold you to earth. And if you're bound by worldly phenomena like habits and diagnosis and addictions and appearances, the cords that hold you are states of consciousness that must be dissolved. Now hear that again. Hear that again. She says, there comes a time when you make your escape from living in lower consciousness. You desire to be born into the spirit, but you cannot rise out of the flesh. Something binds you down. Like a hot air balloon, you're tugging at the guy wires that hold you to the earth. And if you're bound by worldly phenomena, those are states of consciousness that must be dissolved. The cords that bind you have to be dissolved. And there's so much to interpret in this story that's going on that as we conclude today, I want to give you a couple of the characters and their starring roles and their symbolism. And then in the next video, we'll go through the formula. First of all, Pharaoh, anytime there's a king in Scripture, he represents the ruling ego, the ruling consciousness of you in the sense realm, in the human realm. And he's living down in Egypt, and Egypt is living in lower consciousness of the senses, of the sense realm. The Egyptians are the people, the vibrational thought people that Pharaoh rules, and they're the guilt and the shame and the jealousy and the anger and the procrastination and the regret, the frustration, the resentment, the blame, the depression, the addiction, the envy, the bitterness, and more. All of those thoughts are being ruled by a dominant sense consciousness. And when we try to leave those thoughts, when we try to change those behaviors and leave them behind and rise into a higher way of living and being, which the Israelites, the children of Israel, represent that part of us, those thoughts that want to move out of that lower consciousness of Egypt. They want to move out of the low consciousness into the promised land. When we try to leave those thoughts and behaviors behind and rise into a higher way of living and being, Pharaoh commands those thoughts, those negative thoughts, to chase after us when we try to escape. And we get to the Red Sea, which is a fixed universal thought. It's really the collective consciousness that's become a part of the world. It's the kind of thought that says the body loses its vitality as we age, or that some cancers are incurable. And these beliefs, like all beliefs that were once so sure, have been transcended. And these beliefs have taken up residence in your own belief system. And they've created a barrier that you're trying to break through. And it can be difficult, pretty difficult, to break through the collective consciousness of humanity if you've accepted that belief for yourself. The children of Israel, as I said, are the aspiring thoughts in us that want to move from darkness to light, to move out of Egypt to the promised land. And so we find a condition now in the story where our Egyptian lower consciousness thought people are dominating and in conflict with our Israelite higher consciousness thought people. And we're in a place where the negative, where we've let the negative now dominate and rule and control our lives. And what do? So in our next lesson, we'll see how in our communion in the silence with the great I Am, the bondage of the higher self to the lower self is made clear, and a true way of release is indicated. You'll be able to see how you've let the negative dominate the positive in your life, and we'll use the formula that Moses gave us to turn that around. When we've let something rule in us until it's become an established way of life, it can be difficult to break it up in consciousness. But I'll walk you through the steps so that you can be set free from anything that limits you, and have a formula to use anytime you feel you're bumped up against a barrier that seems impossible. So until next time, let the symbolism of these characters kind of turn around in your mind. Where, like Pharaoh, are you letting the negative rule and dominate in your life? How are you like the Egyptian thought people, living in beliefs that are not life-affirming or life-enriching? And how are you like Moses, inspired and committed to having a better way of life? And lastly, begin to see the challenge before you as an opportunity. See God as the divine solution that's possible for you. And begin to just release and shift your thoughts to a way of peace and to a higher vibration. Begin to see the possibility of the promised land for your life. And we'll get the formula for that in the next lesson. Until next time, I'm Cherie Larkin, seeing you abundantly blessed.